Hello, Brutal Planeteers, and welcome to another Brutal Planet album review. You guys remember that show, Captain Planet? That's a reference that's dating me, I'm sure, but that's where the Planeteers thing comes from. Anyway, trying that out, Brutal Planeteers. I don't know if that's gonna stick or not. It's funny, either way. So today, the album I'm going to be talking about, well, there's two albums actually. It's a band called This Will Destroy You, and it's their new albums, New Others Part 1 and Part 2. And this band calls themselves post-rock, which, you know, I'm always skeptical of someone using a title like that. It sounds a little pretentious, but by the same token, it also sounds... it's next level, you know, it's after rock. So I think these guys do a good job of living up to that mantle. And their sound overall reminds me a lot of stuff like Mogwai and Russian Circles, if you've ever heard those bands. There's a band called Red Sparrows that had members of, I think, Neurosis and Isis a few years ago, probably 10 years ago or so. And they put out an album called like The Soundless Dawn, and this type of stuff reminds me a lot of that because I think it's mostly because of the kind of ambient sounds they use in the background. But it's really good stuff. So you know, I've been listening to both these albums for about a month now, just kind of processing them and taking notes here and there, and I really enjoyed both of them. So let's get right to it. So part one, the first song, Melted Jubilee. It has kind of these epic build-ups, and when I turned it on, it almost reminded me of being in the mountains. I don't know if that matters, but just I'm going to try to play some clips of the songs here, and I don't want to play the full songs because obviously we want you guys to go out and stream the songs. We're here to support the artists. You know, we're doing this for the artists, so our goal is obviously not to, you know, spoil it. But to give you guys an idea of what this album sounds like, and, you know, if it's something that fits your taste, encourage you to go stream it on Spotify or Apple Music, or go buy the MP3s, or go see the band live, especially buy their merchandise. I think nowadays, especially, it's like bands make pennies on streams, but you know, they're out on tour, so go see them live. Go buy those tickets, because that's how a lot of bands are surviving these days. So anyway, back to the review. New Others Part 1, and this first record is a little more, I think, subdued than the second one, but we'll get to that later. So the first song, Melted Jubilee, like I said, has these epic build-ups, and I use this term, like the music sparkles is the term I use, and I'm gonna play some clips interspersed here so you can kind of hear what I mean by some of this stuff, like I said. But yeah, there's a theme with this first one, with New Others Part 1, and sparkles is just a word, like the music kind of sparkles, and it has this really dreamy undertone to it, you know, like a Pink Floyd type vibe, just dreamy, spacey, and it sparkles. So the next song is called To Win, Someone's Got to Lose. And on this one, the word somber came to mind, is, you know, when I was listening to the music, it really has kind of a somber tone to it. It starts out kind of like deep in thought, reflective is another good word. So it's the kind of song I would imagine, like this one, To Win, Someone's Got to Lose. It's like when it kind of kicks in, it's the kind of song you would imagine in a movie when someone's like riding a train, looking out the window. You know, that's the song that plays when, you know, someone's riding a train, looking out a window. They hear this song. The fade out is really dreamy, and again, sparkles, has that sparkly element to it. So the next song is called Sinkage, and this one is almost more of like a industrial song. It reminded me a lot of some of these DJs that play old 80s like VHS clips. There's one called Com Truise, obviously, you know, Tom Cruise with the letters switched around, and VHS head is another one. So just the opening of this had that kind of like vintage synth type of sound to it, and then it really takes off into this really intense kind of thrashing piece with the drums and bass. And the whole thing creates this kind of odd tension because there's this like really heavy bass and drum line, and then this kind of pretty like ambient sound of kind of skating on top of it. So when it finally ends, it kind of almost sounds like a broken machine just kind of glitching out, you know. So the next song is called Allegiance, and this one's a lot more ambient and synthy, kind of these like plinky synths, like these bubbly synths on top of it that almost makes it sound like electronic water, you know, like you're kind of submerging or like rising to the top of this like deep, you know, pool of electronic sound, you know. And then the next song is called Weeping Window, track 5, and this one's another really somber track is the word that I used. It has this, I think the term I used here is the album as a whole has a really cinematic feel to it. It's really like, if you're looking to hear some good pop like verse chorus verse structured songs, this is not the type of album you want. It's really great in the sense that it's almost like a soundtrack, like a mental soundtrack. And the thing I love about albums like this is just for me anyway, they call to mind imagery and stuff, or just, you know, your imagination can kind of run wild with it because there's no words, and it's really just the sounds and the textures of the music that you have to, you know, draw from. So it's difficult to kind of review an album like this without sounding like a friggin' English lit major. So forgive me for that, we're using words like somber. This one ends Weeping Window. You know, it's like I said, it's somber, cinematic, and it eventually explodes into this big crushing rhythm with these epic synths playing underneath it, and it kind of ends with these really harsh and dissonant, like almost like distorted violin type noises. So track 6 is called Like This, and this one has, of all the songs so far, has kind of a playful vibe to it. So it's got these like, the drums are kind of off kilter, and it's, you know, the overall vibe is much less heavy. It's really a lot more lighthearted and playful vibe to this song. So then number 7 is the closer, Go Away Closer. And this one's by far the most upbeat track on the album. I put that in my notes I wrote that when it starts, it kind of almost sounds like an adult contemporary song. It's out of character for what you've heard so far, but it works. And then it kind of breaks into this big, huge, epic, you know, feel-good kind of vibe in the ending. And anyway, it ends up being a really good closeout for part 1 of New Others. And so that's part 1. We're going to take a brief intermission now, and we'll be back with New Others part 2 right after this. Planeteers. And we are back with our review of This Will Destroy You, New Others, Part 2. We covered Part 1. This is Part 2 of New Others, and it starts off with the song Sound of Your Death. And where the first one kind of starts off really slow and kind of somber and like, you know, kind of builds into this, you know, bigger, heavier vibe, this one just kicks right on, and just a huge wall of sound, and it's really intense opening track on part 2, Sound of Your Death. So right into track 2, Lie Down in the Light. This is one that they did a video for, and I'll put a link to the video in the description, and obviously here's a quick clip of it right here. But by the time I got to this song, I was really thinking about, you know, this type of music, and what makes it interesting, and it's the textures that they bring. Because there's not really a typical pop sound structure to it or anything, but it's really interesting and enjoyable to listen to because of the textures that they kind of bring to the table. And it's almost like it's more like painting with sound than, you know, a typical pop song structure is, where it's more about, you know, following this verse chorus verse rule and having a hook that is catchy and all that. The hook here is more these interesting kind of layers of sound that they've created and what they're doing. So number 3 is called Clubs. This is probably one of my favorite tracks on the 2 albums. It has this really slow, long, melodic kind of build-up, and then the bottom drops out of it, and it just kind of explodes into this huge melodic, you know, like rock thing. And it's basically the same melody, only bigger and louder and distorted. And then one of the things I really love about the vibe that these guys have, or especially this song, is it's so intense. Like it's like crackling, like it's falling apart. You know what I mean? You have to listen to it to understand what I'm saying, probably, but it just, you get this vibe of, it's like they're pushing the envelope so hard that the whole thing is about to like just fall apart or explode, you know, like it's bursting at the seams, you know. And I think that's a really hard vibe to capture, and this song does it really well. So and then, you know, obviously it has some really great dynamics where it gets kind of more back to the somber vibe of New Others Part 1 as well. So number 4 is Jessie Ray, and this song, it's really interesting. It has, the beginning sounds like almost like the stock music you would hear for like when they show footage of India in a National Geographic show, with like like a sitar kind of sound, like, but it's distorted and it's kind of run through these effects, and they create this kind of soundscape with it, and then they build an entire song on top of it. And the drum and bass kind of slowly fade in behind it, and it takes off that way. The next one's called Cascade, and just like it sounds, I go back to what I mentioned in my review of Part 1, sparkly. A lot of this album has this really like ethereal, sparkly, like spacey, dreamy vibe to it, where it's, you know, I use the term sparkly because it's like one of those, like when the way that they show a dream, or like in a movie where they show like the contrast or the saturation super high, and it's just, you know, like super bright, and everything's like, you can barely see, you know. It's got that kind of a like sparkly vibe to it. And then this Cascade song, again, it kind of reminds me. It reminds me of like a waterfall, or just, you know, running water, but translated into the form of a song, I guess. Really interesting stuff. So, number 6 is New Promised Land Inc., and this one's more the minimal industrial type song, almost similar to on Part 1 they had Sinkage. So this is kind of more in that vein. It's kind of the loopy type industrial vibe, and it's got a lot of these like symphonic stabs and rushes and stuff. And then the last song is Provoke, and it's a really churning, like epic song. Just, you know, again, has this really long build up and a lot of great dynamics and everything. So anyway, these are both really intense albums, and they're both really interesting albums if you are the type of listener who wants to be challenged. And that's a tough one, because I notice for me, a lot of the bands that I really truly love are bands that when I first listened to them, I didn't like them at all. I was like, this is weird. I don't like this, you know. Mr. Bungle is a great example of that. When I first heard Mr. Bungle, I was like, what is this? This is terrible, you know. And then I went, wow, these guys are doing some insane stuff. And over time, you kind of go, whoa, this is amazing, you know. These guys are in that vein, and I'm actually going to have to go back and listen to some of their earlier work now, just because I really enjoyed this album, and it's a good, it's one of those good background music albums that you can put on while you're working on your computer or exercising or whatever. And I mean, I'm sure a lot of people could paint to it or whatever you want to do, but just again, I like to use the word challenging because it's not a typical pop. I mean, so much metal today relies on a typical pop song structure, right? Like there's a verse, chorus, verse, break, guitar solo, chorus, end. And there's no real derivation from that. And that's why I think these types of bands are calling themselves things like post rock and post metal. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really just rock music, but they're trying to color outside the lines, and they're doing a great job. And so I would definitely recommend giving both of these albums a listen. They're both worth the time if you like solid music. So we know you got a lot of options out there. Thanks for rocking with us. This is Dustin on behalf of Brutal Planet Magazine.